As the iceberg loomed like a specter out of the night, First Officer Murdoch gave his fateful command, "Hard to starboard!" a desperate attempt to steer Titanic clear of destruction. But the mountain of ice had already drawn dangerously close, and it was too late to avoid a collision.
On starboard, ahead is our motor, sir.
Moments later, as the Berg slid past the bridge, Murdoch countered with "hard aport," a final effort to swing the great ship's stern away and prevent even greater damage. The ship's bow, now veering northward, pressed on through the night, carried forward by sheer momentum. Though the engines were stopped, Captain Smith soon ordered half speed ahead. For several more minutes, Titanic surged forward into the dark before her engines were halted forever. In the moments both during and after the collision, and even as Titanic surrendered to the sea, some survivors claimed to have glimpsed the iceberg that had sealed the ship's fate. Yet historical evidence and navigational data tell a colder truth. While some witnesses did indeed see the deadly berg as it ground past, it had already vanished into the night long before most on board could have reached the deck to see it clearly following the collision. Throughout the night, the lifeboats rowed in various directions, some possibly toward, others away from the iceberg. Survivors saw numerous icebergs around them, both during the night and as dawn broke, and many mistakenly believed that they had spotted the fatal one. In the midst of an ice field, positively identifying a single iceberg would have been nearly impossible for those who did not witness the collision and actually see the shape and features of it previously. The same is true regarding crew members on Carpathia, who spotted and had to avoid multiple icebergs looming ahead as the rescue ship raced through the night towards the site of the sinking. In the morning, both crew members and passengers aboard the rescue ship saw a number of icebergs around them too. In the days that followed, crew members and passengers aboard other steamers passing through the region where Titanic sank took special note of any icebergs that they encountered. Some even photographed them. From these rare images, a few contenders have emerged, possible candidates for the iceberg that sank Titanic. During the writing of our book, Recreating Titanic and Her Sisters, J. Kent Layton, Bill Wormstead, and I originally wrote a sidebox examining the evidence both pro and con for each of the major candidates claimed to have been the fatal iceberg. Sadly, due to space constraints, we had to make the difficult decision to cut it from the final manuscript. We're excited to finally share this expanded investigation into the iceberg connected to Titanic's fate. In this video, we'll dive into the evidence, piece together the historical clues, and ask the ultimate question: can we identify the iceberg that changed history? Welcome to the Steam and Splendor Network.
One iceberg that has been forwarded as a candidate for the one that sank Titanic appears in a picture taken by Captain Wood of the Etonian. This iceberg was photographed at 4 p.m. on April 12, 1912, over 2.5 days prior to the disaster. After the fact, Wood speculated that this was the berg which sank Titanic, sending a copy of the photograph to his grandfather, along with a note stating, "I am sending you a sea picture, the Antonian running before a gale and the iceberg that sank the Titanic." Despite Wood's claim, the most that can be said is that this was a large berg in the same ice field that Titanic encountered several days later. That said, there are many large bergs in the ice field, and there is no proof that this is the berg that sank Titanic. The coordinates given for the iceberg of 41 degrees 50 minutes north, 49 degrees 50 minutes west, place it just over 9 miles away from Titanic's wreck site. Given the Labrador and Gulf Stream currents that affected the region where the ice lay, there is no way that the Antonian berg, photographed at the given coordinates on April 12th, could possibly have been in Titanic's pathway from rendezvous on April 14th, even when using extremely conservative estimates of the rate and direction of the currents.
Perhaps the most famous and recognizable candidate for being the fatal iceberg is the one which was photographed by Prince Adelbert's 31-year-old chief steward, Max Schonewald. This berg is the one that has traditionally been forwarded as the top candidate for Titanic's killer. Why? This is almost entirely due to Walter Lord, who included the photograph of this iceberg in his classic 1955 book, A Night to Remember. Lord captioned the photograph as follows: "Many an iceberg has been identified as the iceberg that sank the Titanic, but this one has a better pedigree than most. It was photographed near the scene on April 15th. The chief steward of the German ship Prince Adelbert took the picture not because of the Titanic, he hadn't yet heard, but because a great scar of red paint ran along the berg's base. It suggested a recent collision with some ship. White Star Vice President Philip A.S. Franklin was sufficiently impressed that he always refused to look at the picture." Unfortunately, the information regarding this iceberg, as presented by Lord and repeated ever since, is incorrect. In a guest article published on researcher Paul Lee's Titanic website, Brian T. Hill, Alan Ruffman, and Rolf Werner Bach present conclusive evidence from the meteorological log of the Prince Adelbert and a statement from Captain Bäbler, who reported to the Hamburg America line the following, which was then forwarded to the British Board of Trade. On the 16th April, 3:30 a.m., we sighted the first iceberg on latitude 42 degrees 3 minutes north, longitude 48 degrees 57 minutes west. We kept our true course south 78 west, but reduced our speed from 3:30 a.m. till 3:57 a.m. Wind was northwest, 1/2, smooth sea, and clear weather, but overcast sky. At daybreak in clear weather, we saw in the south, in addition to single bergs, a huge field of ice with several more or less high peaks stretching as far as the eye could reach. Towards 8 a.m., we found that this field, in horseshoe form, also extended to the north. We altered our course to the south and steamed along the field in order to break through at a suitable spot when the floes were less compact and where the western boundary of the field was clearly to be discerned. Specifically, the evidence proves that the Prince Adelbert passed to the north of the Titanic's sinking before turning south to look for an open passage through the ice field, thus also staying west of the location of the disaster. More critically, the iceberg was sighted and photographed on April 16th and not April 15th. Considering the currents and drift patterns of Titanic's debris, the fatal iceberg would have been located south of the site of the collision by that point, not to the north. This helps to explain why nobody on the Prince Adelbert saw any debris or bodies from Titanic. Notably, the iceberg sighted on April 16th means that the crew of the Prince Adelbert would likely have been aware of Titanic's sinking contrary to previous claims that they were ignorant of it, which were based on the statement to that effect, which the chief steward inscribed on the back of the photograph of the berg. When their ship passed the iceberg, the crew may have assumed that it was the one the Titanic struck, especially given the red streak visible along its waterline. While this discoloration could have been caused by various factors, there's really no need to speculate further. This particular iceberg can be confidently ruled out as the one that Titanic struck.
Another candidate for being the iceberg that sank Titanic is one that was sighted by those aboard the Bremen on April 20th, 1912. On that date, the Bremen sailed through the area of the sinking. Crew members and passengers were both fascinated and horrified to see floating wreckage and over 100 bodies of victims of the sinking floating in the water. Since the cable ship Mackay-Bennett was already on the way to recover the bodies, Bremen did not stop to recover any of them. The crew did, however, relay further details on the wreckage and bodies to the Mackay-Bennett. As was described in newspaper reports, those aboard the Bremen witnessed the following. From the bridge, officers of the ship saw more than 100 bodies floating on the sea, a boat upside down together with a number of small pieces of wood, steamer chairs, and other wreckage. As the cable ship Mackay-Bennett was in sight and having word that her mission was to look for bodies, no attempt was made by the Bremen's crew to pick up the corpses. In the vicinity was seen an iceberg which answered the description of the one the Titanic struck. Smaller bergs were sighted the same day, but at some distance from where the Titanic sank. The officers of the Bremen did not care to talk about the tragic spectacle, but among the passengers several were found who gave accounts of the dismal panorama through which their ship steamed. First-class passenger aboard Bremen, Johannes Steinke, gave a graphic description of what was observed from the ship. It was between 4 and 5 o'clock Saturday, April 20th, when our ship sighted an iceberg off the bow to the starboard. As we drew nearer and could make out small dots floating around in the sea, a feeling of awe and sadness crept over everyone on the ship. We passed within 100 feet of the southernmost drift of the wreckage, and looking down over the rail, we distinctly saw a number of bodies so clearly that we could make out what they were wearing and whether they were men or women. We saw one woman in her nightdress with a baby clasped closely to her breast. Several women passengers screamed and left the rail in a fainting condition. There was another woman fully dressed with her arms tied around the body of a shaggy dog. The bodies of 3 men in a group, all clinging to one steamship chair, floated nearby, and just beyond them were a dozen bodies of men, all of them encased in life preservers, clinging together as though in the last desperate struggle for life. We couldn't see, but imagined that under them was a bit of wreckage to which they all clung when the ship went down, which didn't have buoyancy enough to support them. Those were the only bodies we passed near enough to distinguish. We could see the white life preservers of many more down in the sea, all the way to the iceberg. The officers told us that it was probably the berg hit by the Titanic, and that the bodies and ice had drifted along together. Stepan Rehorek, a Bohemian who had served as a galley aide on the voyage, had several photographs in his possession, including of the large iceberg nearby. It has traditionally been assumed that Rehorek himself took the pictures. However, compelling evidence has recently been discovered by Henning Pfeifer and Günter Bäbler of the Swiss Titanic Society, which indicates that Rehorek was not actually the photographer. Pfeifer and Bäbler's research on this, and regarding the Rehorek iceberg in general, will be published in an upcoming book with the working title of Der Titanic Iceberg. It is groundbreaking research, and we highly encourage viewers to purchase a copy when it is released. We will share information on where it can be purchased once it is published. Rehorek subsequently described in a postcard home to his parents on April 25, 1912, "I have a photograph of the iceberg and will send it to you. I also saw the bodies of the drowned and the wreckage from the ship. It was a dreadful sight." For this reason, this particular iceberg has been dubbed the Rehorek iceberg. This photograph lay unpublished in a private collection for years and was only rediscovered in April of 2000. There was a second photograph taken of the same iceberg from a slightly different angle, which reveals some additional surface details. There are multiple reasons to believe that this iceberg may indeed be the one which sank Titanic. First, and perhaps most importantly, while many of the sightings of it were fleeting and varied, a number of Titanic survivors described its shape in a very specific way. Able-bodied seaman Joseph Scarrett, who came on deck immediately after the collision, said that it resembled the Rock of Gibraltar, looking at it from Europa Point. It looked very much the same as that, only much smaller. He recalled, "The highest point would be on my right, as it appeared to me." A photo shown of the Rock of Gibraltar from the point Scarrett referenced shows a distinct similarity to the Rehorek iceberg. Scarrett also produced a sketch of the berg showing its resemblance to both the Rock of Gibraltar and to both photographs of the Rehorek berg. Nor was Scarrett the only one who recalled the resemblance. Fireman Alfred Shears said it was a bluff and came up to a point like the Rock of Gibraltar. Bedroom steward Alfred Teisinger also recalled it looked like the Rock of Gibraltar, even though some details of his recollections are somewhat questionable. Carpathia passenger Colin Campbell Cooper, a well-known artist, on the morning after the sinking sketched the iceberg with its two peaks. The resemblance of this berg to both Scarrett's drawing and to the Rehorek photograph were noted by researcher Henning Pfeifer, who first brought this photograph and information of the Rehorek iceberg to the public's attention in his article. Pfeifer noted that Cooper sketched an area where it appears that part of the iceberg was chipped away, and that this closely resembles the photograph of the Rehorek berg, which had the same damage. The proximity of the Rehorek iceberg to the site of the sinking, and particularly to the proximity of wreckage, collapsible B, and bodies, lends further weight to the conclusion that it may have been the iceberg that sealed Titanic's fate. All of the objects appeared to be drifting in the same currents together. Additionally, the photograph of the Rehorek iceberg shows clear evidence of fresh damage to it on its right side, where pieces have evidently broken off, while the rest of the visible portion of the iceberg appears pristine and undamaged. This damage appears in the correct spot at which Titanic would have struck it, as its bow swung to port, nearly avoiding a collision.
Very likely, the visible damage to the berg is showing us precisely how something that we had long known had happened during the collision actually played out, mechanically speaking. We have to allow for the possibility that the berg's face was a straighter vertical edge as Titanic approached it, and that the collision caused part of this face to calve somewhat, collapsing this ice into the avalanche that fell onto the forward well deck. Likely this process continued as the berg passed the area between staterooms D17 and D21, where it's long been known to have broken the porthole in the corridor between the two rooms before actually shoving ice through the porthole of D19, just aft, without breaking the porthole. This theory also provides a possible explanation for how boat number 1 survived the collision. We know from eyewitness reports, such as Quartermaster Oliver, then on the boat deck, that the berg's peak was higher than that deck. There were even reports of ice on the boat deck after the collision. Thus, boat number 1 must have had some level of narrow clearance from the peak of the berg. Is it possible that the calving process caused by the collision cut back just enough space for boat number 1 to squeak through undamaged? The possibility must be considered.
Able-bodied seaman Joseph Scarrett looked aft at the iceberg when he sighted it, describing how the berg resembled the Rock of Gibraltar as seen from Europa Point, with the highest point on the right side. Strikingly, this is the exact view that the photographer had of the Rehorek berg when the photograph was taken. It matches precisely. Interestingly, the Rehorek iceberg may have been seen again, following the sighting of it by those aboard Bremen. The cable ship Mackay-Bennett was chartered by the White Star Line for the grim task of recovering the bodies of Titanic's victims, which were then floating in the North Atlantic. Mackay-Bennett departed Halifax on April 17, 1912, and managed to recover 306 bodies before returning to port on April 30, 1912. While at sea, Mackay-Bennett's purser took photographs of an iceberg that bears a very strong resemblance to the Rehorek berg. 2 of the photographs were published in the New York Times on May 4, 1912. While the exact position of the iceberg was not given in the article, the pictures were accompanied by the following description. The iceberg was sighted by the cable ship while searching for the bodies of the great liner's victims last week. The berg was far south of the scene of the disaster then, but it was noted that the area around within a radius of a mile was full of wreckage, and many of the bodies were found within that same radius. Those aboard the Mackay-Bennett had little doubt that this was the particular berg which the Titanic struck in the collision, which so suddenly ended the great liner's career. Although the article did not specify the date in which this particular iceberg was photographed, the diary of Clifford Crease, a mechanic aboard Mackay-Bennett, does provide a clue. The diary is held in the Nova Scotia archives. It indicates that after passing several large icebergs prior to reaching the site of the sinking, another large berg was sighted. Crease describes this as follows in his diary entry for April 20th, 1912. Arrived at spot where ship went down at 7:15 and lay to all night till daylight. A large iceberg about 4 miles from ship, supposed to be the one Titanic struck. Lots of wreckage floating about. 4 bodies passed by through the night and picked up later on. The fact that this berg was sighted on April 20th, the same day that Bremen passed through the area, spotting the berg and passing along information to the Mackay-Bennett as it approached, raises chances that this iceberg was the same one as the Rehorek berg, just taken from the opposite side and at different angles.
On April 22, 1912, the cable ship Minia departed Halifax to help recover the bodies of Titanic's victims. Arriving in the search area on April 26th, they joined the cable ship Mackay-Bennett and remained until May 3rd. The crew eventually recovered 17 individuals. While doing so, Captain D. Carteret saw an iceberg, which he stated was the only iceberg in the area, and photographed it. The captain claimed that there was a red streak along the base, much like the Prince Adelbert iceberg. Due to this, plus the proximity of bodies nearby, it was assumed that it was the fatal iceberg. At first glance, the Minia iceberg does not seem to resemble the Rock of Gibraltar, the shape described by several Titanic survivors. However, the question remains, could it be the same berg as the one photographed from the Bremen, known as the Rehorek iceberg, and the one photographed from Mackay-Bennett, but taken from a different angle and accounting for melting and other potential changes in shape, given the elapsed time between the sightings and photographs? At this point, this possibility cannot be ruled out entirely. For example, we know that storms had passed through the region in the days after the sinking, and rainfall and wave action could dramatically alter the size and shape of the berg in the given time. Certainly, the iceberg photograph from Minia is deserving of further research.
While no single detail alone confirms it beyond all doubt, taken together, the evidence forms a compelling case. The Rehorek iceberg appears to be the most likely culprit behind the sinking of the Titanic. Unlike any other candidate proposed over the years, this iceberg was documented as being in the right place, at the right time, just days after the disaster, surrounded by the bodies of victims, debris, and even the upturned collapsible B. It also precisely matches the distinctive shape described by eyewitnesses, resembling the Rock of Gibraltar as seen from Europa Point, and had fresh damage at the exact spot and location where Titanic would have impacted it. Unless new, contradictory evidence comes to light, the case for the Rehorek iceberg being the one which struck down Titanic stands as the most convincing yet discovered.
A special thank you to our supporters on Patreon, including Dean McIntosh, Evan Plemming, Lucas Sidlowski, Charlotte Zurich, Bluebird Nut, Martin Cahill, Sam Forker, Joshua Kusiek, Maximilian Metcalf, Nikki Chan 92, Rachel Warner Sanchez, and Snow Monkey.